Every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday. It is Friday, August 26, 2022. My name is Emma Viglinden for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Alex Pareene of the New Republic and the Substack, the AP. And later, Astra Taylor of the Debt Collective will be joining us to talk about student debt relief. Meanwhile, a federal judge has ordered the release of the affidavit, with it being heavily redacted, of course, used in the raid of Mar-a-Lago. That's coming at some point in the show, most likely. Mark Meadows has now been ordered to testify in the Georgia probe into the efforts to overturn the election. Moderna is suing Pfizer and BioNTech, accusing them of stealing their COVID vaccine intellectual property, which was created by taxpayer money and is being hoarded by corporations who made millions off of it.
Property
Billions.
mongers. Yeah, crazy. It's ours.
Waive the patents. That your move, Dark Brandon. Come on, you're on a roll. Speaking of that guy, Biden's approval rating is back up 6 points from July's record low for him. He's back at 44% now, in part due to independence. Keep going. A new wrinkle to Biden's student debt relief. If you made payments during the pause, you can get a refund. Call your loan servicer directly if that's the case.
Huh.
Yeah, essentially, like if you started paying off your debt during that time, you can get some money back. In Arizona, Blake Masters is spooked after scrubbing his website of his extreme anti-abortion views. He put out an ad saying his opponent, Mark Kelly, is lying about those very views. Keep the boot on their necks about this abortion stuff. And not lastly, a judge has temporarily put North Dakota's trigger abortion ban on hold. The same thing was done with Idaho's earlier this week. Workers at a Lansing, Michigan Chipotle have become the first Chipotle to unionize.
Woohoo!
And lastly, Tucker Carlson is set to be deposed today in Dominion Voting Systems' $1.6 billion defamation suit against Fox News. That's pretty fun.
I like that.
All this and more on today's Majority Report. I like that very much.
But what about the free speech of people who lie about elections to the point where their entire Republican Party, basically 70% think the president was illegitimately elected? What about the free speech rights of those people that create such a state of affairs? Aren't we concerned about that?
I am. I gotta say.
Sorry, just fell off that slippery slope. Sorry.
It is literally 1984.
I'm sliding.
Knock, knock. Who's there? George Orwell. There's no punchline. What's up, guys? So happy to be back in the studio. A little surreal. But I don't know why it's surreal, but I guess I'm just like it was odd to come back here. I'm like not used to it. But your brain gets I don't know. It was just a little muddy. My brain is still catching up.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Well, hey, at least your mic's good now.
Yes, right. I'm not the only one with brain fog here. Forgot to turn my mic on, guys. What's up with that? I'm being canceled.
Yeah.
But we have a great show for you today. Alex Pareene will be joining us to break down the news of the week, which includes mixed results out of New York in the primary process. Some good, some bad. Florida and more. And then, of course, this massive student debt news. So Biden is... he really has become Dark Brandon. And I know that it's hilarious that he was so incentivized or excited by the memes, the dark branded memes. But at the same time, if this is what gets him to act, if he thinks he's cool with the youths when he cancels their student debt, Biden, you're Fonzie, if that's the case. Or who's cool these days? You're Harry
No
Styles.
Fonzie. It's still the kids. I'll still think it's Fonzie.
Yes.
He bangs on the soda machine. Or wait, maybe it was a jukebox actually.
Yeah. Either way, it's very current. Biden, you're just like Fonzie when you cancel student debt.
I mean, if we are communicating with Joe Biden, I think that probably is the proper reference for it.
Yeah. Biden, you're just like Jerry Lee Lewis.
It's like Paul Bunyan.
Anyway, like he seems to be embracing this, and I think already we can start having a conversation about Biden doing more in his first term, even though it's only halfway through, less than Obama did. Frankly, I don't know if it's particularly close in terms of like what actually was accomplished, but these are good things. And the messaging too is becoming a bit more aggressive ahead of the midterms. The official White House Twitter account put this out.
So it's a quote tweet of ACYN saying, agreeing for our government just to say, okay, your debt is completely forgiven. It's completely unfair. And the White House says Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene had $183,504 in PPP loans forgiven.
And then they just go through this thread from the official account. Congressman Vern Buchanan had over $2.3 million.
$2.3 million.
Yes. I mean, and again, PPP loans, in the title, it's supposed to be, and there's just like a whole thread of everybody who's criticizing everybody on the Republican side who's criticizing the student debt forgiveness, how much they received in Paycheck Protection Program loans, because it's inherent in the title. It was supposed to be for people's paychecks, but an analysis done by the federal government of the PPP loans found that like only 25% of the PPP loan funds went to workers who would have lost their jobs otherwise. 75% went to business owners, to shareholders, to suppliers. It did not go to the paychecks, even though that was supposed to be the strings attached to the money.
Yeah.
But they made it was the Trump administration. They made it fairly loose so that people were able to get away with it, including members of Congress who just pocketed that money, because an overwhelming over 90% of that money is essentially going to be forgiven.
Yeah.
So people don't have to pay it back.
Here's another analysis. The PPP had a measurable impacts. It meaningfully blunted pandemic job losses, preserving somewhere between 1.98 and $3 million job years of employment during and after the pandemic. PPP also reduced the rate of temporary closures among small firms, though it is less clear whether it reduced permanent closures. The majority of PPP loan dollars issued in 2020, 66 to 77%, did not go to paychecks, however, but instead accrued to business owners and shareholders.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
I'll just a nice free money from the government.
For them, right. And that's to the tunes of millions of dollars in these instances.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember stories of influencers getting PPP money. And
David and I talk about this all the time. We could have got it for, Sam could have got it for Majority Report.
Yeah.
I'm 100% sure we could have got it for Left
Reckoning.
Reckoning. Like it, a lot of these, Crowder got it. Stephen Crowder got it for like $70,000 worth.
And I mean, I think it's important to point that out. It works well with and pairs well with what Biden said to that reporter yesterday, which is essentially like when there's questions of fairness for everybody else, as if this is a zero-sum game. No, this is completely just like a gift by the federal government. Biden can unilaterally choose to do this, and there's no offset. There's no subtraction that's happening. It's just a decision to not seek payment for $10,000 of debt for these people, and $20,000 if you received a Pell Grant for these people who are eligible. And it should be more than that.
Also, those are the same people who look at like younger generations and say, well, life's not fair. Well, guess what? Life's not fair. And actually, look, we all know tuition is a conspiracy against working people getting a college education. So I would say, like, to the trolls who say, like, well, what about the people who paid off their debt? Reparations. We should tax more Wall Street speculators and pay those people back. If they have receipts for the student loan payments they made in the 90s or whenever, the government should cover those, because tuition should have never been imposed on working people.
But here's Biden feeling himself, right? He was at a campaign rally in Maryland yesterday, where he's got a little bit of his confidence back now that his approval rating's at a whopping 44%. But look, keep doing more stuff like this. Again, we've said this time and time again, political wins, actions is what makes you popular, not saying, let's be bipartisanship, let's work together, not appearing like you're a unifier. Actually succeeding at passing legislation and showing to the public that you are active in your leadership is what makes people enthused about your presidency.
And it seems to enthuse Joe Biden too, because this is as active as he's seemed all administration.
Right. And it's good. So here he is, just with his swagger back, I guess.
My friends, we offer a starkly different version and vision of this country, a vision of a better America that's within our reach, that's within our hands, if we just vote. If we elect 2 more senators, we keep the House and Democrats, we're going to get a lot of unfinished business we're going to get done. Folks, look, we'll codify Roe v. Wade. We'll ban assault weapons. We'll protect Social Security and Medicare. We'll pass universal pre-K. We'll restore the child care tax credit. We'll protect voting rights. We'll pass election reform and make sure no one ever has the opportunity to steal an election again.
Those are some carrots to dangle ahead of the midterms.
That's like Biden's version of the Howard Dean thing. He's like, we're going to Alabama and Virginia and North Dakota.
Pre-K, child tax credit.
That's all women's ban.
Pre-K is good.
We needed a screen.
Pre-K is good. What he should do before the election, though, is deschedule marijuana, and he'll get that. Yeah, he won't have to do any of these campaign events. He can just sit on his ass in
50 states.
in Delaware.
That would, I mean, oddly, of all of the things that we just talked about there, that might be the thing Biden's least likely to do, because he didn't run on marijuana. He was the one Democrat who didn't run on marijuana legalization. He is very old-fashioned in that regard. But look,
easy, it's sitting there for you, though.
Protect Social Security, ban assault weapons, codifying Roe v. Wade, passing universal pre-K. Now, look, I don't know how you're going to codify Roe v. Wade without some sort of filibuster carve out or overhaul, but still, right? This is good campaign rhetoric. And if the Democrats miraculously retain the House and the Senate, oh boy, like, we're going to hold you to that.
And also, like, if Republicans have to run on, we're going to make it so a judge makes you have that $10,000 back on your student loan amount. Like, that's not exactly a winning message heading into any election.
And I wish Biden would go further and say, elect us, make sure I have the power to do what I want, and you get 10,000 extra.
Yeah, no, they're very much into this is a one-time thing. We'll never ask for it again until, maybe after the election, because it is a problem that's not going away. So, fundamentally, we are going to have to address it again. Maybe Biden will get around to it.
Well, the Debt Collective, who we're going to be speaking to Astra Taylor later, they're not going to let up. This is not where it ends for them. So, I think the work starts now in pressuring him to do more. But, all right, folks. Before we get to Alex Pareene, we have a quick word from our sponsors. We should really consider making face reveals a thing. We spend so much time communicating with our eyes, only that showing our lower halves should be a moment. Like, bam, a beautiful smile. If you use Quip, it is at least. Okay, I got there eventually. Quip gets your smile ready, making good habits easy with all the essentials you need to take care of your mouth, to care for your mouth as well. The Quip Electric Toothbrush used time vibrations with 30-second pulses to guide a dentist-recommended 2-minute clean. It's loved by over 7 million mouths. Now, I mean, an electric toothbrush, particularly a Quip electric toothbrush, because it's designed so well, that just is like makes it way easier to clean your teeth, and it's just way more thorough. You can even upgrade with a new smart motor to track and improve your brushing and earn sweet rewards. Build your whole routine with even more Quip, like the reusable floss pick, which I have heard about constantly from Sam in a positive light, or refillable mouthwash. And on top of that, Quip delivers brush heads, fresh floss, and other refills every month from just $5. No extra shipping cost. If you go to getquip.com/majority right now, you'll get your first refill free. That's your first refill free at getquip.com/majority. Quip, QUIP.com/majority. And it's Get Quip, GETQUIP.com/majority. Quip, the Good Habits Company. And Sunset Lake, don't forget about them. One of our favorite sponsors. If you use the code LEFTISBEST, you get 20% off their excellent products. That's smokables, that's gummies, both just Seder gummies and melatonin included in those gummies. You get the tinctures, which I have run out of, unfortunately. Helps me sleep. I was going hard with those during COVID. All those things. You can go to Sunset Lake, Sebede.com. Use the code LEFTISBEST. Get 20% off your order. All right, folks. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Alex Pareene. We are back. Emma Vigeland and Alex Pareene on the Majority Report. What's up, Alex?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm back in studio after my bout with COVID. So I'm excited to talk to you. I should say you are the AP, the proprietor of the AP on Substack, the good one. What's going on over there?
Working on some great content for everyone. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline.
Churn out that content.
That's what I like to hear.
I'm working on I'm iterating new ways of doing means testing for debt forgiveness. I've been working on some really wonky stuff. We're gonna get really
good.
deep.
I'm glad that we have the wonk on now, because then we'll be able to get to talk about policy. Thank God. We need Mick Mulvaney and Alex Pareene on to talk about budgeting. But let's start there. Let's start with student debt. I mean, the big news of the week. What was your reaction when you saw that basically Biden had settled on a little less than his campaign promise, which was $10,000, a lot less than what was being asked of him by Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, who were kind of banging the drum for $50,000, but means tested, so it's a little bit less than what he promised, but still going to affect over 40 million Americans, help them with their debt, and wipe out the debt for something like 20 million. So this is a positive thing. What was your reaction?
My reaction to it's funny. It came in a couple stages, because I think when this was first reported ahead of the official announcement, it sounded it sounded more meager than it ended up being, and it sounded even sort of more means tested, because when you have the whole sort of the entire package of changes to the student debt program, it's a very positive thing. But the very first initial reports was like, oh, they're going to means test this to within an inch of its life, like typical Democrats. And it reflects the fact that it took such a long time to arrive here. I think reflects the fact that Joe Biden himself and a lot of people in his administration were really, really, really ambivalent about wanting to do anything at all. And given that constraint, it's a pretty damn good deal. I don't know how much more we could have expected from Brandon.
I mean, but now that he's getting positive feedback, he seems to be growing stronger. Like I am just shocked at seeing this late August surge from Biden choosing to be more public facing, and also racking up not what we expected with Build Back Better, which was so much more massive than what the IRA ended up being, but racking up some wins in terms of like actually getting things passed, chips, IRA, student debt, all this stuff. Like, that matters. The perception that the president is doing something and is active matters. And
yeah,
I think that matters even more than anything, honestly, going into the fall.
It's funny. This is like a discussion that you and I and Sam were having last year. I feel like a lot of the time, in almost apart from, and this is a pretty shallow way of looking at it. But like, apart from what the president is accomplishing and what a congressional majority is accomplishing, just appearing to accomplish things is pretty damn good and for racking up wins leads to like a sort of cycle of good publicity, good press. There was this idea that, and I think this idea was born of a sort of cynical desire not to do too much, but there was this idea that like the best thing you can do is not make a lot of noise and tinker around the margins and all this other stuff, and like say pleasant things but don't change too much. And this is the meta debate we've been having for a while now, and I think it's becoming clear that like if you can at least present yourself as getting things done and accomplishing things, like not just supporting popular things but doing them, that's gonna be better for you, just politically. It seems pretty simple, but there's been a lot of debate about it.
I feel like there's like a 20-year delay in the Biden administration's perception of what gets them good press, which is that it finally kicked in, right? I mean, I don't know. It's like taking Advil that's expired 5 years ago. Not that I condone it, but that, it has a bit of a delay and a lag. But theirs was really expired. Whatever they were taking was really expired. And now they just understand that, just like, constantly talking about how you want to work with Republicans is not a substitute for getting notches on your belt. I mean, and that's what's going to help them. Yeah.
I think we've had I won't call it it's not a true natural experiment, but it's the closest you get in politics. We had, if you want to test the theories of how to get good press, how to goose your numbers, how to appeal to voters, if you want to test those things in terms of like polling and media coverage, we had the bipartisan infrastructure plan, which was their signature bipartisan policy agenda item that passed last year on a bipartisan basis. That was testing the theory of whether bipartisanship in and of itself will get you better polls and good coverage. It didn't. I mean, it did nada. It did nothing for Biden's approval. His approval continued to be in the toilet. And it's not like we're having a surge. He's not like above 60% right now. But the unilateral, completely one-party, unilateral executive action that he just took, that comes with controversy because a lot of people in the press don't like it, is already being received by regular people, I think, much more approvingly than the bipartisan highway bill that was supposed to prove that bipartisanship can still work. Like it turns out executive action and doing what you actually promised to do also works.
I mean, well, you can't control for everything, Alex. So it's hard to say. It's not entirely scientific. What, Matt?
Oh, I just think it's funny that there was an entire argument saying we should never even try what the best couple months because it won't work anyway. So don't even think about it, guys. Like that seemed to be the argument we were getting from people who thought like it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And what is interesting to me too also is I was reading ahead of speaking to her, Astra Taylor's piece in the New Republic on their fight, their long fight for student debt relief, and how this really originated out of Occupy. And back then, I mean, it was really seen as pie in the sky, and like it was not going to be a viable um option for democratic leadership, whatever form that took. That it was not being talked about within Democratic Party circles, anything like that. It was more of an activist wish, and that has transformed into actual policy results, tangible results fairly quickly, within 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's fairly quickly by American political standards. But if they had done it in 2009, I would have had student debt to wipe out. Yeah, I mean, I think to go back to your sort of analogy here, if you want to talk about the delayed release, uh, uh, like politics of Bidenism here, it's we had we've had figures like Chuck Schumer be on board with this for a while now, a very mainstream figure in the Democratic Party, and I just think it what it took a very long time for Joe Biden to get over, and I think you have two things, and on the one hand, for a politician like Joe Biden with his background, it's like student debt relief is like, oh, college boy wants a handout, like Mr. Too Good for a blue collar job wants a handout. Like that's his attitude, and he imagines hard hat Democratic voters like getting resentful about it. And obviously, if you look at the reporting, it took like literally a year of people who actually understand who has debt in this country. Like, what are the demographics of people who have debt? What is the debt burden across different income levels and different classes? Like, it took a lot of convincing for him to get on board with this. And
well, that's another shockingly just outdated perception of who is middle class, who is working class in this country, and how many millions of people have been funneled into this for-profit college system as it exploded in expense. And I just don't know how you've been in politics for 50 years and don't have a fundamental understanding of that.
I mean, it's
Look, he got
remarkable
there,
that could be true. Yeah, no, I mean but you're right. You're right. It's crazy that could be true, but I think it just really definitely is. And you can see it in the response, the sort of borderline hysterical response of sort of center left, economist pundits freaking out about this. But like they haven't engaged with the student debt debate that has been going on at this really high level of detail, research, advocacy for years and years by people like Astra Taylor and all these other groups. They just haven't engaged with that. And so when the policy happens, they are stuck on these 15-year-old out of date talking points. Again, like going back to like, oh, how are you going to tell a plumber that some woman studies major from Brown is getting debt relief and it's like, well, first of all, like the plumber probably makes more than the woman studying major from Brown. But like if you had been paying attention for the last several years, people have been doing the work for you. People have been trying to explain like this is not a crisis of the upper class. This is not a bunch of whining rich kids. The debt burden has fallen on a ton of what we used to have, call the middle class in this country. And it's just funny to see like all these people popping up now who like clearly have only engaged with this issue in the most shallow way possible, opining now on it with these ridiculously archaic ideas of who actually has debt and who this policy helps.
Yeah, and I mean, we should underscore that, and I mentioned this at the start, this does help 42 million people and wipes out the debt for 20 million people. And apparently half of Latino student debt holders also will have their entire debt wiped out. Just from a political perspective, I don't know. I think the the weakness of the response saying like, oh, these are bribes. Yeah, so is everything in politics if you want to phrase it like that. What were PPP loans?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And what is, I mean, there was a really successful. It's funny because Republicans understand their job when they win power is to reward their friends. They just understand that as politics. And Democrats, it's not just that, not just that conservatives and Republicans attack Democrats when they attack them for appearing to want to, reward their friends, shower goodies on their allies. That's not just something Republicans do. It's been a major force within the Democratic Party for a generation now, dating back to the 80s, dating back to the DLC, the Clinton years and DLC. There has been a concerted effort to discredit the idea that Democrats should use power when they hold it to help their supporters.
Yeah.
That's been considered sort of grubby, grubby and borderline corrupt for years now. And so the people who have been railing against that brand of politics for years and years and years are outraged to see it gain any sort of currency.
I wanted to turn and talk about, the New York election results as well, because mixed bag. I think I'm in New York 10. I voted for Yulene New, and I was disheartened to see that the massive mess that was made of the entire New York primary process due to this rapid redistricting where Mondaire Jones kind of had to scramble, ended up in New York 10, essentially split the vote to a degree that really caused a victory for Dan Goldman. And I'm not even that critical of Mondaire Jones's decision to a degree because he was put in a really impossible situation. But in hindsight, it shows these things need to be a lot more strategic when you have left candidates going in these races against a guy like Dan Goldman. I mean, he's tied in with real estate. He is the heir to the Levi Strauss fortune. He is not going to be a progressive representative of New York 10, which is probably one of the bluest districts in the country. Like this, it's a bad result, and I think a lot of it had to do with intra-party messiness.
Yeah, right. Like you say, a mixed bag, and the circumstances were so bizarre. It's hard to say we need to take these lessons from it. But I think a pretty obvious one is there needs to be better in races like this. There needs to be better attempts at coordination for left candidates and so-called progressive candidates, because this was a result I think anyone could have seen coming, with a very low turnout primary, the second primary of the year. With the good news is you can sort of see, especially in other races, you can see that sort of avalanche of money from right-wing Democrats, and endorsements from moderates and stuff like that didn't end up meaning a lot for a bunch of these state legislative races. But yeah, New York 10 was I don't want to call it a fiasco, but it was like a really avoidable an avoidable misstep. And it would be nice to hear. Well, I mean, I get like we're New York's working on it. Like they've done ranked choice for other elections, and these things are hard to sell. They're not sexy. But like there's a lot of obviously outside of coordinating candidates, there's a lot of stuff we can do with electoral reform to like actually help these things reflect the will of the voters a little bit better, and not have a guy win a primary with a quarter of the vote in a completely bizarre low turnout election.
after blitzing the area with a lot of money for the final week, but also leading up to it, because he was able to use
Well,
what,
right.
$5 million of his own money. It is interesting. Like, this is an instance in which ranked choice voting would have been very much more preferable, and much better in terms of reflecting the will of the voters, as you say. We do that in New York for citywide primaries now, but I think there needs to be a larger push to do it on the federal level. Not that it would have this incredible like change to the outcomes, right? Not that we'd be electing DSA members up the wazoo, but I do think, at least in this instance, it would preclude somebody like Dan Goldman from being able to spend so much in a divided field.
And the nice thing about it, right?
Yeah,
The nice thing
go
about
ahead.
it is it just like, and again, like I feel like the sort of election nerds, there are some of them who like really don't like ranked choice, and there are lots of other things, but like again, there are other forms that are, might be fairer. I just think we need more experimentation, right? Like first past the post sucks. Like we should just be trying other systems, and it should be easier to like try to change the way we elect people to more accurately reflect the will of the voters, to make our elections more representative. It's not even just about preventing Dan Goldman. It's about, not forcing voters themselves to have to make these complex and often really dumb calculations in their own head based on like polls they read and based on strategic voting. Like we want to minimize strategic voting and let people like support the person who they think best represents their interests. It should be that simple. Like that should just be the gold standard for how we elect people.
That's something that also should not be allowed is that the DCCC chair should probably not be allowed to call the shots on what district that he wants to run in, edging out a progressive representative and pushing him into what they hoped was at the beginning a race between Mondaire Jones and Jamal Bowman, so that they could at least knock one of those guys out, one of the leftier people out. And it ended up they still knocked Mondaire Jones out, but the fact that it's allowed, that the DCCC chair is running, his whole mantra is supposed to be, I want to elect as many Democrats as possible, and yet he chooses, because he's a coward, to run in a district that's a little bit more blue, edging out Mondaire Jones, abandoning what was where most of his old district already was in, because he wants the best chance for his own skin to get reelected. And that seems like a perverse incentive structure. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, again, there a lot of what we say when we complain about the Democratic Party, a lot of what we're complaining about is specific arms of it, and the congressional electoral committees are just the worst of the worst in terms of like in terms of their tactics, in terms of their strategy, and in terms of their goals. On all three, they routinely have only the self-interest of their members at heart. They're petty and vindictive, and they are not actually good at their job. So not a terribly surprising, but yeah, I mean, it would be nice if we could somehow change these campaign arms of the Democratic Party to be something other than an incumbency protection racket for the rottenest members in the party.
But like you say, incumbency protection racket. It's
only
incumbency for only a certain people, because
only for some,
not for Mondaire Jones and not for others. I mean, that was not something that they were interested in. They're not going to protect that incumbent.
No, and that's what I meant. Yeah, like it's an incumbency protection racket just for the people who are in the club, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, it's like they're kind of on the attack now, because they were fighting a rearguard action for a while against these primaries and these open seats that left wingers were winning. And I think, like, for the last few years, it's been, again, the electoral results themselves have been a mixed bag. There's a bunch of incumbents that these moderates wanted to topple that they haven't been able to topple. They'll keep trying. But they've been on the offense since the beginning of the Biden years. Like they think they have the money. They think they have, or they do have the money, and they think that they're winning. And they're much more concerned with policing the Democratic caucus than they are with expanding, the size of the Democratic majority.
Turning to Trump and such.
Who?
Have you ever heard of this guy?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
right.
from guy from Home Alone 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Also had a great reality show that
Yeah.
many people like. He's been silent for a bit. Usually he calls into like any right-wing radio show that he can get his hands on, or at least, dial on his phone. But his lawyers must be telling him, shut your damn mouth, because this is a really serious investigation. Like, we're still waiting on the fully redacted or heavily redacted affidavit. I think it's breaking right now that the redacted affidavit's been released. But I don't. What do you make of the choice by this federal judge to release the redacted affidavit? I mean, I understand the point that it's in the public interest because he's the former president and what it relates to, but I don't like the idea of the Trump legal team getting any tips. Even if it's redacted, they still might be able to glean some things on who's cooperating with who and where this originated from. And also, when you have this memo that's going to, when you have the affidavit that's going to come out and it's full of black boxes that have information redacted, my sense is that that's going to be a gift to Republicans so that they can run with it and say, look at what they're hiding. And there's no way for there to be any counter narrative to it because, of course, it's in the middle of an investigation. But that might be just marginal. It just is one wrinkle I want to monitor.
I think that I think I agree with you there. It reflects the sort of asymmetric nature of the sort of the law against Trump. The law meaning like the feds and the judiciary, and then like Trumpism, like Trump world. And I say asymmetric because it's like you have like still this, I think, belief among Garland types that like by being above board at all times, we will demonstrate with our bending over backwards to be fair. No one will be able to impugn our motives. And as you say, like you release a redacted document with a bunch of black boxes to the right, and then they're just going to run wild with what is in that. Like they don't really care. Like the fairness and truth, we all know those things are sort of meaningless. So to some extent, it's a gift to them. But again, I don't know. I don't know if it. It's also unprecedented and surreal that it's hard to say with any confidence. Like, well, will this actually materially change this process? Like they were going to be, the right was going to be, and the Trump world was going to be sort of off the wall, bonkers, and hysterical no matter what.
They're going to be reeling from this, I think, regardless, because I'm honestly afraid to say this, but it's been only good news electorally for the Democrats in the past 2 months. And I saw Dave Weigel tweet that if you thought that the raid on Mar-a-Lago would be equivalent to the rage that is felt nationally by women after Roe v. Wade is overturned in terms of how that impacts polling or the polls and people going to vote, if you thought that that would be true, then you need like to get your head examined for Washington brain, because there's just nothing. One, the rage about abortion seems to be sustaining itself in hard data when you look at like Pennsylvania, women registering to vote in record numbers, same in Wisconsin, some of these really important states for the Democrats with these Senate elections coming up. But also, I'm being treated so unfairly, me, Trump, me, political candidate, is not a galvanizing point. It was not a galvanizing point when Hillary Clinton ran on that in 2016, and I certainly don't think it's galvanizing for Trump supporters to the degree that other things will be in an off-year election when Trump isn't in office and when it's just about me, me, me.
I think that is correct. I think that a common mistake that people with, as you say, Washington brain make is to conflate the sort of giant bucket of people you could call Trump supporters, and even the people who are pretty fervent Trump supporters, to conflate that group with like the Trump cult, in the sense that the people who are really super invested in the soap opera narrative of Trump's persecution, that's a much smaller group of people. That's, I don't know how big the own American news audience is. It's actually not that large. There's a ton of people out there who like Trump and will vote for him if he's on the ballot, and it's a much smaller subsect of that people who are like invested in the Trump storyline. So yeah, I mean, the idea that you will, reap the whirlwind if you prosecute Trump is massively overblown. And to think that was going to cancel out outrage about Dobbs is pretty absurd to me. And Trump again, and with his broader base of support, he wins when he acts like a winner, not when he's whining like a loser.
Loser. Right. Well, I mean, I feel like that's undoubtedly true. And that paired with, again, some of these policy issues like abortion, that it seems like voters are able to divorce those from Biden himself. Like, it is good that it's only good news that Biden's approval rating is going up to the whopping 44% that it's just reached. But it doesn't necessarily seem like it's connected to what we're seeing electorally when it comes to abortion galvanizing the base. As of right now, that's a fairly new phenomenon.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting because I think that what we're seeing, and we'll see if this changes, but if Biden's approval begins to show improvement now that he is doing a little bit more to actually help people, I think that you're going to see that disparity, because I think it already showed up in the polling. There was this, especially among young voters. Among young voters, it was like, we hate Joe Biden, we despise him, we want him to go away forever, and then we will all vote Democrat in the fall. We just will, because we know we have to. Like, that was sort of the polling. It's already said that for young voters. And you might see that disparity narrow as we get closer to election day, like where it's no longer, like where it just becomes easier to be like, all right, like Joe's fine, whatever. Like, we're okay with him now. You might see that narrow, but I think it's going to be hard for a lot of, pretty brain dead pundits to like grasp that a president can have low approval and his party can still beat the other party if voters actually understand the stakes, and they're like, there's a thing that clarifies the stakes, a really, really, really clarifying thing. When Roe v. Wade is overturned, and almost immediately, after basically, years of people saying like, oh, Republicans saying like, we don't really mean it, like we want it to happen, but we don't really mean it. And then, when they actually just start jumping into action, banning abortion the second they have the opportunity to, that clarifies things. You can say like Joe Biden's too old and I'm worried he's going to fall asleep, but obviously, like, I need the Democrats to be in charge. And I think, who knows what's going to happen with the trend over the next few months, but I that seems to be the mood of a large portion of the electorate.
That's a generational divide too. I mean,
Totally.
I'm really speaking electoral or not electorally, but anecdotally, because it's difficult when I'm talking to like older members of my family for them to understand that I'm like critical of Joe Biden, but still going to vote Democrat in the fall. I just
Right.
feel that like anybody who's millennial or younger, we know the Republicans are monsters. It's just, it's inherent. It's given in just like, it's a given, right? And they're most of the more interesting political discussions are within the context of the Democratic Party, of how we're going to move forward within that. And like, most young people aren't even engaging with the Republican Party to that degree, and they'll still vote Democrat because of that fear. But you can that division between Biden's approval and the polls is probably much more pronounced within people under the age of 40.
Yeah, I think so. And you want to talk about the generational divide. You can see it in how a lot of Democratic strategists and some politicians, what their instinctive response is when they see that their president has terrible poll numbers. The Democratic president has terrible poll numbers. And then there's one group, I think an older group, who say he's losing moderates. I gotta run away from the party. I gotta be like attack. I'm not like those other Democrats. They love inflation too much. I'm gonna go after the party. And it seems pretty clear. Again, we're just talking anecdata here. Like, I was talking to some neighbors the other day, and they were complaining about Joe Biden, and but then like their complaint was like literally like they want more stimulus checks. They were just like, give me more stimulus checks. And it's like, that's not I would call these Biden base voters. Like, these are inner city, like working class Black like people who will like make up the urban like Democratic base. They were, this is before the student debt thing and other things, but they were, my neighbors were like bitching about how Biden's out of touch and all this other stuff. And they weren't like, because now we're moderates. No, it was like, he's not doing enough for us. And I think like the smarter Democrats are sort of get that. And they're not going to be like, I'm running away from my party. They're just going to, again, I'm praising Chuck Schumer a lot. He sort of gets that the dynamic is like, people have to see that you are doing things for them. And if the better Democratic candidates can sort of thread that needle of being like we're going to try to work on Joe to get him to deliver more for you, I think that'll be more effective than the the ones who are thinking they have to run away from the Democratic Party label.
And do you think that really all of this started with the January 6th committee priming a lot of the country for kind of some level of negative partisanship? I still feel like that's where the tide began to turn this summer, where things looked a bit better for the Democrats electorally. And part of that was because they were engaging in negative partisanship, and now they've kind of done both things that they need to do, which is do some positive things and rack up some wins with just what you're delivering, and also make the American public understand that the other side is insane.
Yeah, right. And this should be pretty obvious by now too, but you need different tracks of messaging, but you need different tracks of political tactics to reach different audiences too, right? And I think for a long time a lot of Democrats have just been like pretty devoted to this idea of unified singular messaging on kitchen table issues or whatever. Like that's the thing you hear all the time, and that's the sort of Pelosi, DCCC, DNC angle is like, let's focus on drug prices and then not do anything on drug prices for years. But right, like what you got to do is you got to make an effort to like to persuade some of the electorate that the Republicans are unacceptable and extreme, and you can't vote for them. And then you for another track of people, another tranche of voters, who don't really give a shit. There are people who don't like, they're like rightly or wrongly, they sort of look at everything in the lens of like everyone's corrupt anyway. But you got to look at that group of people and just got to be like, we're doing stuff for you. And those aren't contradictory, and they're not like, this is what always bugs me about like these messaging debates. Like, it's not contradictory to have multiple sort of messages for different groups of the electorate. I don't think, and
No,
it's
because
necessary.
it's exactly what we just talked about, though. Because the student debt stuff, that's going to resonate with the millennials and younger who have student debt, and also who might not think that positively about Joe Biden, but are still probably going to vote Democrat. It's just like, how many of them are going to vote Democrat?
Yeah.
How much are you going to turn out? But for the generation older than that, I mean, I feel like there's like any semblance of politics or policy debate has been replaced entirely by January 6th stuff. Like that's and that's the cable news audience.
And again, it doesn't it doesn't bug me that much. But when Joe Biden says stuff like "this ain't your grandpa's Republican Party," the sort of pedantic like history book reading like person in me just wants to be like, oh, well, in many respects, it's just a continuation of your grandfather's Republican Party. But that's good politics. It's good politics to say that, because your audience is people who, not that they've been staunch conservatives their whole lives, people who for years have been like, well, I don't like those crazy far right Republicans, but those solid moderates are on my side. So what you actually got to do is like say, this is not your grandpa's Republican Party, to actually define for those sort of voters, like to say to them like, oh, it's worse than you thought. Like you actually like things have changed. So
Right.
that kind of stuff is like that's actually pretty decent politics.
So what's happening over on the AP? I know I started off with this, but or what's happening with the New Republic? Anything you want to plug here?
What is happening? The Politics of Everything is the podcast to do with the New Republic. We're doing one. We have actually a pretty good episode that should be coming out next week on food safety, which sounds very dull, but also about the Daily Harvest crumbles that got influencers in the hospital with organ damage.
Wait, what?
Do you know the story? Oh, it's really good.
I get Daily Harvest.
So if you just get like the smoothies or something, right?
Yes.
They were selling with a brand new product. They were selling a brand new product called lentil and leek crumbles. That was like a ground meat substitute, I think. Well, they gave it away to some influencers who lost their gallbladders. Long story short.
What?
Anyway, well, if you want to hear more, next week on the Politics of Everything at the New Republic or wherever you get your podcasts.
Should I cancel my subscription? Like that is. I'd like to keep my gallbladder intact.
Yeah,
the smoothies are fine.
The lentil crumbles. Stay away from the lentil crumbles.
Stay away from the crumbles.
No
Everything
crumbles,
else seems okay. No crumbles.
I mean, it sounds disgusting anyway, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
kind. Yeah, I get it, because I'm like I want healthy, ready to make meals, and then they're kind of gross. The smoothies are pretty good though, but
Smoothies are
like
fine, yeah.
I mean, it's all vegan, that's all that stuff. But all right, well, now I have to listen to the Politics of Everything. Alex Pareene, thanks so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We are back, and we are joined now by Astra Taylor of the Debt Collective, who so generously took time out of this crazy week to come speak to us about student debt cancellation. Thanks so much for coming on, Astra.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for having this issue on in the past when it was just a twinkle in some wild activists' eyes.
Well, let's talk about that twinkle, because it really is amazing how far this issue has come from being, bless you, Matt, being a not, I don't want to say a pipe dream, but it was something that was seen as politically unfeasible when it initially came on the scene during, what was it, Occupy? Can you talk a bit about the evolution?
Absolutely. I think pipe dream is totally a fair term. I mean, I have been revisiting some of the early coverage. So in 2011, there was an Occupy student debt campaign. 2012, occupiers had a protest called 1T Day, the day student debt surpassed $1 trillion, a number that seems quaint even after this debt relief. And the media's response, as it was to so much of Occupy's actions and critiques, was totally dismissive. But what was unique about those actions is they were actually making a demand on the federal government, saying the government should cancel all student debt and make college free. That has always been the position of the Debt Collective. And what experts said at the time was, well, that will never happen. That's just administratively, legally, politically, economically unfeasible. So we've totally proven those critics wrong. And I think that's really important. We've demonstrated that student debt can be canceled broadly, not just for students of predatory for-profit colleges or for people who deserved public service loan forgiveness, which is another word we object to. We've shown that it can be done with executive action. So this is a huge, huge hole in the wall, right? And obviously, we're going to keep pushing and fighting for more because we need to restructure the way higher education is provided in this country. But it's absolutely proof that these debts can be eliminated and that we do not have to condemn millions of people to suffer under them.
I mean, it's proof that the Biden administration can be pushed on issues that are this common sense as well. Like, I mean, when you first began, I know you've been working with some Democrats and powers that be to really advocate for broad student debt cancellation. What was some of the reaction that you got within the Democratic Party? Was it, from the beginning of your activism on this topic 15 years ago or whenever you began to now, what was some of the change that you saw in the response from Democrats, especially like a Democrat like Joe Biden, who is as conservative as you can kind of get, or at least was perceived that way going into the White House in the modern Democratic Party?
I think it's really important to name Joe Biden's allegiances throughout his career. I mean, he has very much been a servant of creditor interests. He was a key player in the 2005 bankruptcy reform bill, where he got a lot of bipartisanship. There's a lot of Republican support. And that bill actually stripped critical bankruptcy protections from student debtors. He comes from Delaware, the credit card capital of the world. So I think we have to also be, realistic. Who were we pushing in this moment? We were pushing a man who has not been a friend of debtors historically. And, this is absolutely a movement that came from the grassroots, and many of the legal arguments for debt cancellation, both for students of predatory for-profit colleges and for broader relief, also came from outsiders. And the pickup came because we, under the Obama administration, so when Biden was vice president, we successfully forced the Department of Education to start issuing a trickle of relief for people who had gone to now defunct predatory for-profit chain called Corinthian. And so we proved in that moment that debt could be canceled, that student debt could be canceled by the federal government. And it was actually Elizabeth Warren who was paying close attention to that picked up that possibility and listened to activists, including the Debt Collective, who are saying, this is possible. You can do it all. It can all go. The legal authority exists. And so it was through progressives in the Democratic Party that, it was then picked up by Chuck Schumer, which, the Debt Collective was very surprised by. And he's been an ally in this, even if, he wasn't pushing for full cancellation like we were. He was also with Warren and pushing for 50,000. Bernie Sanders, raised the stakes by campaigning in 2019-20, not in 2016, but in the last presidential primary cycle on full cancellation. That actually was thanks to Ilhan Omar, who was the first person to say, no, let's just do it all. So it came in through, again, from the grassroots to progressive officials who, helped really mainstream this issue. And those officials ultimately began parroting what was the debt collective line, which is this can be canceled through executive action. In fact, the debt collective wrote an example of an executive order that, hey, Joe Biden signed here, working with lawyers close to us who are experts on this issue, and so it was, we want as organizers to have people in power ultimately parroting our phrase and saying, Joe Biden, with the flick of a pen, you can cancel student debt. And they did. And then people, began to believe this is reality, right? Actually, he could cancel student debt with a flick of a pen. And what we saw this week is that we were right. And this is the thing we need to take away from this moment. If Joe Biden can cancel $10,000 or $20,000 of debt through executive action, he can cancel it all. He can cancel all federal student loan debt, and he should. And we've shown that it's possible. I really don't want people to despair if they're still trapped under, six figures, because we just need to keep pushing. That, this is not a handout. This is not a favor. This is because debtors have come out of the shadows and demanded this and built the political power. So, I'm encouraged that we can move the administration in the right direction, and one day somebody will cancel it all. Mark my words.
I mean, well, we need the legal team to pour over and come back to Joe Biden with a memo a year later on if there's authority that would allow for him to do another 10,000. I mean, I'm joking, but it to me, it was frustrating that it took this long. I'm happy that it ended up happening, but the whole convoluted, we need to consult with lawyers about whether or not I have the authority to do this was a stalling tactic, in my view, because as you say, there's nothing precluding him from canceling it all. And it's not a zero-sum game, as is being framed by a lot of people in the press, as if student debt cancellation will take away in terms of tax breaks for middle-class families. No, this is just within the executive authority. There's no loser if student debt is fully canceled. And I think that that's important to repeat too, because it's just an entirely different authority than, say, tax making policy. No, this is just the federal government deciding we're not going to seek repayment on this. Boom. End of story.
I mean, absolutely. And so, it's basically the same logic as if I lent you $10, I don't have to collect on it, right? And these are the legal authorities are drawn from legislation, actually. So this is actually executive authority that was already granted by Congress, first in the Higher Education Act of 1965, but then more recently with the passage of something called HEROES from 2003. So lots of Republicans voted for those bills. So this authority is completely legitimate. Your point about who wins and who loses is so important. There's just been so much concern, trolling, and bad faith criticisms of this, as those, canceling debts for some is going to make some other category of people poor. It's the typical divide and conquer approach that we see. And the fact is that, everybody will be better off when our family members, our friends, our neighbors are not saddled with unpayable debt that has disastrous consequence for their lives. I mean, people, can't buy homes. They experience housing insecurity. They don't go to the doctor. They're not able to do the things they want to do with their lives. They're not able to pursue, things like, public service, being a public defender or a teacher or a nurse in this world where costs are rising. So, I think we're all going to be better off economically, but also just socially by freeing people from this weight. It's not something I personally benefit from. I paid off my student debt years ago. This is something I'm doing because I think education is a public good. I want people to not be shackled by debts and in paying the federal government, monthly payments with interest, that it's just unnecessary. The government should be making revenue through the student lending system. The Department of Education should be funding education directly for everybody to benefit from as a public good. And so that
Wow.
is something that will require legislation, though. There is not the executive authority to do that. And we have to be politically strategic and realistic as we move towards that aim, because that is something that the president cannot do with the flick of a pen.
No, but at the same time, free college for all, as we saw, as outlined by the Bernie Sanders campaign, is a not very expensive proposal. It's do you mind telling me do you remember what the dollar figure is for that?
I don't know off the top of my head. In fact, there are multiple. It's funny that someone on the team's working on an op-ed that I hope will be out soon exactly on this. But if people who say they care about economic efficiency and cost savings really did, then they would say, let's stop doing this convoluted lending system where universities are funded through private loans that then burden the individual with extra fees, with interest and all this. And let's actually just fund education directly, because you know what happens when you use public dollars to fund education? Well, then the government can actually put some conditions on that money and say, keep tuitions down, keep those administrator salaries down, lift up the staff salaries, lift up the faculty salaries, stop exploiting adjunct labor, stop exploiting the cafeteria workers. So the public money, this is why the foremost opponent of College for All, of the College for All bill, was actually 2- and 4-year colleges and universities, because they're pretty happy with the model as it is. It gives them a lot of freedom when what they're doing is charging high tuition and forcing students into debt to cover that. So those are actually our adversaries in the fight ahead.
And so that is the next step too, as opposed to not as opposed to, in addition to canceling all student debt. I guess let's talk then just about the immediate ramifications of this $10,000 cancellation if you make under $125,000 a year, and if you got a Pell Grant up to $20,000 with that same income cap. It's not enough. We've made this clear, but there are going to be over 40 million Americans who are helped by this. So the mixed bag of it. I mean, one, there's just this jubilee, which is excellent, but there's also, this is the first step of many. What is your reaction from like a 30,000 foot view about that dynamic?
Yeah. I mean, the word I keep using to describe this is bittersweet, because I work with debtors all day long, and people in my family still have student debt. So, for some of my family, for, a sister, it's going to be a really big difference in her material life. For another sibling who went to law school and now works doing legal aid for elderly people, this is not enough. This is just like, it's not even interest. It's not going to reduce payments. It's immaterial. Both those things are true. Another real problem with this is that despite all of the advocacy, not just of the debt collective, but so many people who know the intricacies of the student lending system, despite so much pushback, the administration went with this income cap of 125, that is 125,000, very arbitrary, but also by having an income cap, it necessitates an application. So the real problem is that they are not delivering this relief automatically. They have the full power. They have the full power to just cancel the debt on this end. So right now the demand needs to be cancel the debt and abolish the debt and abolish the paperwork. The paperwork is a total performance of fiscal responsibility, and it comes with so many risks. It obviously these bureaucratic mechanisms are not known for being perfect and working smoothly. But also it just means that a lot of people who really need it won't know about it. They won't know how to apply. They'll get confused. I mean, right. The fastest growing demographic of student debtors is actually people over 60. A lot of folks, not to generalize, but I know, we are working with a lot of older debtors now. We've heard stories where people just do not have the technology or the tech savviness to apply for the programs offered by the Department of Education. So there are so many problems with this. The fact is they could have done it automatically. This application process is unnecessary. They haven't even made public the application for people to apply. This is, again, why we need to build a stronger, bigger debtors movement so that we could have the force behind us to get this done right. And in fact, in the case of, the last thing I'll say on this is in the case of the Corinthian College fraud, we launched a debt strike for Corinthian students in 2015. demanding full automatic cancellation for the over 500,000 people who had been defrauded by that school. And they insisted on doing it through an individualized process. Well, in June of this year, they finally did it automatically and canceled it on their end for everybody. So that shows it can be done. And we told them over and over, don't repeat those mistakes. So, the practical advice for people listening is, watch out for that application, get it in fast. It turns out you can actually get a refund. Follow the Debt Collective Twitter for payments you have made recently if you have paid off your loans and actually sort of undermined it and are worried you might have undermined your ability to get this cancellation. Follow our Twitter. We really try to keep you up to date with honest information. And don't trust anyone who's trying to charge you for help accessing this relief. It should be totally free to access.
Great advice. And lastly on this, I saw you talk about, and you've said it before on this program, but really just about how a debtors movement is a source of power. And when you get people to come together and you resist the imposition of this kind of debt when it is entirely unjust, that is a way to turn the tables on the powerful. And this is just such an immense success. I mean, congratulations, like that this, for Democratic Party standards, for them to adopt something that was, I think, unthinkable for Biden if we knew of him, 15 years ago, or who he was when he was
unthinkable for most
Delaware.
people. The American people
sorry,
would have
hold
thought
on.
this was unthinkable.
Yeah, sorry, we had your
Yeah.
volume down, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And so just the whole people power part of it. Can you just talk about what that means for asking the federal government to deliver for student debtors?
Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, we have to remember the vast majority of people, I would say everyone, thought that this was pretty unthinkable 15 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was not the common sense. And so for me, I've been, of course, watching social media, watching the reactions, and it actually warms my heart to see people say $10,000, $20,000, that's not enough, because we have changed the conditions, changed the public consciousness so that people feel entitled to debt cancellation. I mean, 10 years ago, people were not talking about it. It was such a source of shame. People were very overwhelmed. So this is what, one of my favorite people, Jane McAlevey, the veteran organizer, says. She calls it raising expectations. That's a big part of organizing. We've raised people's expectations. And, to your point, the Debt Collective's motto is that, we do not live beyond our means. We are not in debt because we live beyond our means, but because we are denied the means to live. Because this is a country that doesn't even have $15 minimum wage. I mean, I'm sorry, that's not enough, right? But in the state I'm in, minimum wage is still, it's not even $8 an hour. We do not have universal health care. We don't have education as a public good. So we're forced to debt finance these things, these necessities of life. And we need to change that. We can change that by building power in the workplace. We can change that by building power in our neighborhoods or in our, buildings as tenants. We can change that through participating in the political process. So that alone is never enough. And we can also change it by organizing together as debtors and recognizing that our debts are assets. They are a source of profit and power for other people. And yes, we need to turn those tables. We need to be really strategic. We need to recognize this is a long game. And just the last thing I'll say on what a long game it is. I mean, the founding fathers were very afraid of poor and working people rising up and demanding debt relief. They called it the wicked project of debt abolition. One of their fears of a more democratic or directly democratic, but representative system was that debtors would demand debt cancellation. So we're part of a really long fight here.
Don't say that, because now that I realize it wasn't in the spirit of the founding fathers, my originalism is like, my alarm's going off. Now we can't have it. No, I'm messing around, but honestly, I could see the Supreme Court making that case at some point, obviously.
No,
if there is that literature, right? Since there is that literature, right? But anyway, Astra Taylor of the Debt Collective, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it, and congrats on the win.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
All right, folks, with that, we are going to wrap up the first hour of this program, or it's more than that, first part of the Majority Report, the free half, as we like to say. But first, Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian Media universe?
Yeah, tomorrow I will be airing my discussion at 2 Eastern on the Twitch channel with Joshua Con Russell on ayahuasca. Not ayahuasca, as my North Dakota ass likes to pronounce it. So we have a good hour-long conversation about that. And also on October 23rd at 7 p.m. at the Terragram Ballroom in Los Angeles, I will be alongside folks like Ben Burgess, David Griscom, and Jason Miles for Give Them a Revolution, a live show in Los Angeles.
Oh, wait, when is that?
October 23rd. So
That'll be fun.
Yep, it's a day before David Griscom turns 30, so we're going to go out and celebrate. So tickets are on sale, I think, today. I don't know. Look at Ben Burgess. He seems to be most. I just retweeted him from the majority account. But check out him. He's got the poster and probably will have the link up soon. So if you're in LA or in the area and you want to see us, I also hear that I think Nando Villa and Anna Kasparian may be in attendance.
I'm jealous that I won't be there. That sucks.
A little FOMO for Emma.
A little bit. All right. Well, that's very exciting. We're going to head into the fun half, guys. We're going to take your calls. We're going to read your IMs. We're going to do some clips. Fun stuff. See you there. 646-257-3920.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it.
Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally